Hey guys, how's it going? Venture Investing here today. So today we're talking about space, SPCE, Virgin Galactic. They just released their earnings Q3 2021. So we're going to talk about that today. Before we go into that, we're going to do a quick update of all the things that have transpired with this company in the last 6 months or so. Get you up to date. We're going to go through the earnings very briefly, top line, bottom line items. Then we're going to go through the presentation, and I'm going to give you my commentary on the earnings call that they said. Then we're going to do a quick dive into their financials to see what's going on. We're going to try to determine what's going on with this company, and I'm going to let you know whether I'm going to be thinking about buying a little bit of this stock or not buying a little bit of this stock. So a lot of information, a lot of important things, I think, as well in this earnings report. So we're going to get into that today. Take a look at the stock. After hours, it's down about 1%. I think at one point it was up almost like 4%. And I think it's because that top line revenue number of $2.5 million was a surprise, but we're going to get into that, guys. So with all the things going on here, guys, I thought we'd just briefly go through what happened in the last little bit here. Heading all the way back to May 2021, this was their third flight, the two pilot test. This was Unity 21. So that one we have covered. That was successful. Then we went to Unity 22, and that was July 2021, and that was the big one where Richard Branson was actually part of the flight. It was their fourth flight. It was basically the one that was testing the viability of the system, of all the flight controls, everything like that, right? Because we saw so many delays before this, and to get to this part was, to get to this point was actually very big moment for the company. However, you can see in red here, it all went downhill after that. They were supposed to do, what's in red here is what basically didn't happen. They're supposed to be a Unity 23 flight. That was supposed to be in September. Of course, we're in October now. And that was expected to demonstrate the microgravity and astronaut training research. And that was supposed to be revenue generating with the Italian Air Force. Of course, that never happened. The timeline from there was Eve, the mothership. They were supposed to do modifications with that. And they were saying that those were going to go to mid-2022. And what this was going to enable is enhanced flight rates. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of this because they talk about this yet again during this earnings call, but basically go to from 10 to 100. To go from 10 flights between inspections to basically 100 flights. So they're always talking about ramping up here. And the specific thing I want to note here is that they were saying this was not going to affect any of their flights. And it seems that they had changed their mind, and that's one of the reasons that the stock kind of tanked from there. Also, the next thing that they wanted to do was Unity 24. That was supposed to be Q3. We're at Q3 right now, and that was going to be the third fully crewed flight. And then they were saying in late Q3, again, basically around this area, they're going to do Unity 25. And that was going to be the start of the private commercial service, basically generating revenue. Now we're really far off that. At the bottom here, I have what actually happened, what transpired to stop this. Now, in September 2021, the FAA ground the flight. This was actually turned out to be relatively minor. We're going to get into that in this video because they give us a little more commentary with that. Basically, the FAA has cleared it, so that's not something to be concerned with going forward. Hopefully, we'll get into that in a little bit here, but it was something that was concerning at the time, but basically has passed. And then in October here, just recently, 2021, they've decided to upgrade Eve and Unity. So Unity, of course, being the glider and Eve being the mothership. And they're saying ultimately no more space flights until mid-2022. And that's changed again here. We're looking about late 2022. So what I find interesting here is that they were saying these upgrades weren't going to affect anything, but now apparently they are. So that brings us to today and today's earning release. Okay, so what I have here, I wanted to mention to you guys really quick first, is I'm denoting all this in thousands, okay? And some of my previous videos I did in millions because it was a bit easier. But I'm just going to follow what they have on their financials, and it makes a lot more sense, especially considering I don't know how many millions we're going to be seeing. So I'll read them out here, guys, but just something to keep in mind. So here I've got Q1, Q2, Q3. Of course, I'm going to have on my Patreon on the screen right here. It's going to pop up. I'm going to post this probably today. It's pretty basic. There's not much to it because there's not much to this company right now. But the things that we're looking at here is their earnings, and it was a little sporadic in the early years because they went through the SPAC there to become a publicly traded company. But this basically is going to give you all the earnings throughout the quarter, so if you can compare them or see where they were. But specifically just on this one, we're going to go Q1, Q2, Q3. Now, revenue was big this quarter. We're in Q3, $2,580,000. So that was the one I think that just drove the stock up because people maybe weren't expecting that. I think analysts were expecting about $1 million or so, something like that. So we're going to talk specifically about where that came from, specifically when we get into the earnings call and slideshow here. Q2, they only had $571,000, and of course, Q1 there was nothing. If you look here on the spreadsheet again, we saw very little revenue any time before that. Net income for Q3 was a loss of roughly $48 million. So it's a drop from the $94 million that we saw a quarter ago. Actually, if you look back, this is one of the lowest losses that they've had pretty much in the entire history of the company that we can see, right? So that's pretty good. Of course, we generate a lot of revenue, so maybe that had something to do with it. Cash was the big thing here. Cash is almost at $1 billion, $988,697,000. Specifically, if you want to get into that, last quarter is about $552 million, and Q1 is $660 million. This is something that I think they're going to need a lot of cash, and they talked about, raising more through debt, through equity. They weren't very specific. I don't think they really wanted to say. I think there's, just to be safe here, I think we can say that there's probably going to be some more dilution, but we're going to get into that as well. So let's take a look right now at the presentation. So in terms of the agenda that they gave, they said they're going to do a commercial sales update. That's the first thing we're going to get into. Enhancement program and timelines. This is when they talk specifically more about these enhancements that seem to be delaying everything, or one of the factors delaying everything. Fleet expansion overview, and then the financial update. Now this slide here is extremely crucial, okay? There's a lot of confusion with this. I think a lot of people thought that they got 700 new astronauts, but that's not the case. That's not what happened. So they're saying new customers joined the future astronaut community, targeting 1,000 future astronauts before commercial service. So commercial service, we'll get into that, but they're saying it's going to be about late 2022, so I'm expecting about a year. Approximately $700 they have currently on board. But you got to keep in mind, they had 600 before. 100 came from that. 100 more came from the spacefarer community. So they signed them up to bring this to 700. Now, they get $150K deposit. 25K of that is non-refundable, so that's not much money that they're generating. And of course, when are they going to actually have these flights? Who knows? And this is at their new updated price of $450,000 per seat. Now, separate from this, following their Unity 22 flight, they kind of put their feelers out there saying got another 60,000 people interested, and they're going to say that they're going to funnel this into the next flight after that, presumably 2023. So you can see how far in the future this is. But they're trying to say that they're trying to generate leads, generate, demand for this, because they're going to be ramping up so quick, but we're going to get more into that as we go here. So the main thing to keep in mind here is we're looking for that 1,000 future astronauts, but we don't even have the capacity yet either for that. So I think that might be one of the reasons that they put this off until 2022, maybe even 2023, we're going to see. And again, here they give a little bit of an update on the Unity 22 highlights. Now, we're all aware that this happened, but this is where they gave a little bit more insight into what happened with that FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, or agency rather, halt that they had on their flight. So basically, you can see from the picture here, they're saying that when they came back down on this flight path, that they basically just barely strayed into airspace that they had not been approved for. So that's what basically triggered this investigation, and they work with the regulatory agency. And basically now the good news, I guess, is that they have this new additional reserved airspace right here at the bottom. So yeah, listening to this, I didn't think it was too much of a big deal at the time. I thought, oh, what's this? But it was basically just something that they didn't, their air traffic controllers, even though they have these FAA people in the room with them, they didn't have the ability to communicate in real time with air traffic control, basically. And so they've rectified the situation. Now they got a little bit more into the actual modifications that are going to be going on with the mothership. Now, they talk about Area 1 here first. That's the only area that they highlighted, but they talked about the others. So they're saying the center wing and launch pylon. So they're reinforcing the middle wing, and they're upgrading the pylon to a new design. So they're saying this is something that they have to inspect very often. Basically, they're going to be reinforcing that. As well as Area 2, they're going to be working on the horizontal stabilizers, removing and replacing the H stab. So I guess that's the back part of the wing there. And then Area 3, the avionics, mechanical, and structural systems. So this is all going to be very costly. But again, this is that 10 to 100 flights between inspections that they're talking about because they want to be ramping up. They also want to be building more motherships as well. But I mean, I think a lot of this are really getting ahead of themselves when we're still not even seeing, any revenue that is generated from space flights from the private astronauts. Now, to give you an idea again about their schedule, and of course this keeps getting pushed back. In July 2022, they're going to be doing solo flights with Eve. Okay, basically this is the spacecraft. Then VSS Imagine. So they're going to captive carry to Spaceport America, and then they're going to start glide flights with that. Then they're going to kind of basically, it sounds like, be doing what they're supposed to be doing right now, research space flights with Unity, and then they're going to get to that private astronaut space flights at the top here. And again, that's at the end of 2022, but I wouldn't be expected, I'd almost expect this to go to 2023. Then we're looking at January 2023. They're going to do the VSS Imagine glide flight, and then they're going to be generating revenue there. Again, kind of like what they're doing with Unity there, which is actually supposed to be going on right now as we speak, but this is their next one. And then second quarter 2023, they're going to be doing the private astronaut space flights. So it looks like from their timeline here, they're not even going to have a second spacecraft up generating revenue from private astronauts until at least, I'd say, mid-2023. So that's really kind of bad news for the stock, in my opinion. Then they talked about their fleet expansion, design, and collaboration center. So they're saying that they're actually going to be having a new facility in South LA for R&D and design and engineering. And this is going to be for the Delta class aircrafts and also the next generation mothership. So I expect to hear a little bit about that going forward. And they said on the call that they're going to be updating this more in the future. They said basically listen more for more updates in the future. Again, here we're talking about the capital allocation. So they're talking about cash and cash equivalents. Like I said, it's about $989 million. They keep saying about $1 billion, but it's not quite $1 billion. But anyway, with restricted cash, it is, but that's restricted cash. But we won't get into that. One thing that they mentioned here is that their expenditures are going to grow significantly next quarter, and basically this is to do with Delta class and next generation aircraft, so I wouldn't expect profitability to be getting any better. And when they were actually asked about this, when they're going to be cash flow positive, it was like there was no answer. When is it going to be? Again, they're saying though, capital allocation priorities, maintain a strong balance sheet and cash position. How are they going to do that? Well, I'm reading between the lines that they're going to dilute more. They might tap the debt markets as well. But we also saw that this quarter that they already did that, or I guess that was actually last quarter, where they issued 13.7 million shares for about $500 million. And you got to keep in mind, this is a company that at the time only had 243 million shares outstanding. So that's a significant dilution, and expect more of that going forward. So all things remaining equal, that should affect the value of the stock. Free cash flow was negative $53 million. A little bit better than expected. It was about $65 million last quarter that they expected, but they're saying that this was a little bit less because they canceled the flights of Unity 23. Of course, that makes sense, right? And they're guiding next quarter around, I believe it was $85 to $95 million. So it's going to be worse, a loss of $85 to $95 billion next quarter. So again, things are not going to be looking much better next quarter. Now into their financial results here. They give you really a lot on here. All they talk about is the loss of $48 million versus $92 million a year before. Now, they don't give you the revenue here, they give you the net loss, but they talked here about where the revenue actually came from. And it sounds like it was mainly, a lot of it was spaceship advertising revenue from New Mexico, so the state of New Mexico. It was a logo that was on the Unity 23 flight, as well as government contracts related to the payload service milestones. So basically agreements that they had in place there. And I mentioned that smaller amounts were the non-refundable deposits, but I think that those will probably, depending on the accounting rules here, show up on the balance sheet. Now to go into the financial results to get a little bit better idea here. Again, so here they actually report it like I am in thousands. So you saw the revenue of $2.5 million. Of course, last quarter there was roughly 500,000, somewhere around there. Some significant expenses here. SG&A about $50 million, research and development about $35 million, so they had an operating loss of $83 million there. And actually, we talked about this before, this change in fair value of warrants. I'm not going to get into that too much, but It's something that, it's a little ambiguous to me and they never talk about it, but it was actually plus $34 million. So that brings us down to the net loss of $48.3 million. When you take into account the other comprehensive loss, so foreign currency transaction, unrealized loss on marketable securities is $48.8 million that I talked about there. And we're going to get into more of that marketable securities in a bit as well. So the net loss per share diluted was 32 cents per share. And again, you can see down here that their number of shares outstanding has increased because of that dilution, right? Looking at the balance sheet, we talked about this here. We had cash and cash equivalents about $702 million. There's your restricted cash of $18 million. So that's not really included in the cash position. Now they have marketable securities, $29 million, and those are classified as short term. So actually, I kind of find it a little interesting that this company has short and long term a lot of securities. I mean, it's good, but the company, in my opinion, is going to be so cash strapped. They might have to dive into those pretty quick, but we'll see what happens there. So again, here, marketable securities over long term are about $256 million in long term marketable securities. So that gives them a lot of assets, about $1.1 billion assets. And when you look at that in terms of liabilities, they're looking in a pretty good spot. But the question is, how long will that last? Looking at the cash flow statement here, we had the net loss of $272 million. But keep in mind that this was for the last 9 months. So that's the difference that you see here, is that we're going, the last quarter was 3 months, so this loss is bigger because it's looking at the last 9 months. One thing I don't like to see a lot again is that stock-based compensation increasing almost $49 million. I think the company has to deliver more before they do that. But again, that's me. I know that this happens a lot, but this is something that kind of irks me with what's going on. Customer deposits were about $2.1 million of that. So that gives us a net cash flow using operating activities of a loss of $165 million. In terms of their investing activity, you can see here, this last 9 months, they purchased that $286 million in marketable securities. So take that for what you will. I mean, cash is kind of dead right now. You gotta be stupid, in my opinion, to hold cash, but that's a lot of money that they've just thrown there in marketable securities, and they've classified most of those as long-term. In terms of financing activities, again, we had stock options exercise of $18 million. I don't like to see a lot of that right now. And again, here you can see the proceeds of the issues of the common stock, $500 million, which is what they need, but that caused a lot of dilution. So that brings us down to the end, cash and cash equivalents of $702 million for that period of time. So what are my thoughts? Am I thinking of buying? Now, if you guys have been watching me for a while, you know that I sold out a while ago, and I think it went up, and now it's basically back down to where it is. Okay, this quarter, I have a little bit of mixed feelings, but I'm tending to err more towards the stay away from this for now. I think this is going to be dead money for quite some time, just in my opinion. It was nice to see this revenue, but of course, this revenue wasn't based on any private astronaut or really any revenue generating flights, right? Cash on hand was good. I mean, they're going to need cash, but it was built up through diluting shareholder value, right? And going forward, this is something I'd really watch. That was talked about a lot. They're going to need a lot of money for all these upgrades. To generate the amount of revenue that they want, the amount of flights, they need a lot of money. And they're going to have to dip into that, and I think that they're going to have to basically raise more money. They're probably going to dilute when they're able to do so. However, they might not take advantage of that if the stock doesn't go up, right? If they can't get a good bang for their buck, so to speak, so they might issue debt, which could encumber the company a little bit, make that balance sheet not as strong. So personally, I don't see a lot of things on the horizon. We're not looking, they keep delaying this. We're not looking for revenue generating flights for a year, maybe longer in my opinion. So what's going to drive the stock in a short period of time here? This could be a really, really long play. And if the stock dips down low enough, like I've said before, 10 or somewhere in that range, I might consider picking up a little bit. But right now, although these weren't horrific results, I don't think it's anything to get too excited about. But it's going to be interesting to see what the stock does tomorrow and what it does in the next little bit. I think it's going to be kind of range bound for quite some time. But I'd love to know what you guys think. What do you think? Disagree with me if you want. About the amount of cash, or when you think that they're going to actually be generating revenue. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts or any other information you have, because sometimes it's a little bit confusing. Sometimes the way that they represent things on here, especially with astronauts interested or adding to their private astronaut group, it can be a bit confusing. So let me know down below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the channel, guys. It really helps the channel, and I will see you in the next one.